Hello and welcome to another great shout marketing and growth interviews. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and a host for these sessions. This series, we're talking about marketing and growth and how it evolves from a startup to a scale up phase of a business. These are nice warts and all interviews with marketing leaders and business owners who have been through this process. And we really hope it's useful to CEOs and founders who are going through this stage of business and see it from a perspective of those people who have been through it. And today we've got Alex Whitson. So Alex kicked off his career at Haymarket Publishing. He launched a new division within Haymarket Business Media, comprising all new video and digital content. And then he moved on to become MD for VouchedFor, which is a ratings and review site for financial advisors. While at VouchedFor, he's played a key role in launching a financial coaching business called Hatch, and that was sold to Octopus Group 3 years ago and is now actually called Octopus Money. And VouchedFor has grown its subscription base by the 400% since 2020 and was acquired by the Fintel Group at the end of 2023. So that is all good stats, Alex, and welcome. Thanks for coming on here.
Thanks, Ed. Brilliant to be here.
Good stuff. So what I tend to do is kind of baseline and kick things off with a question around how do you define when a startup is moving to that scale-up phase?
So I think the simple answer is when you've found your product market fit and then you put your foot down and grow it. But I'd caution against too binary a distinction between the two. So when you're in that startup phase, you've got to make sure that you really focus on activity that can genuinely scale the business. And then when you do reach that scale up point, it's really important not to lose that startup discipline of making sure that every penny counts, making sure that you do everything that you can to stand out, punch above your weight, that you're really disciplined with the tests that you do and so on.
Makes sense. And within the kind of KPIs that you saw, I suppose that kind of earlier stages of VouchedFor to kind of where you are now, how have those KPIs changed over time?
Probably not as much as they should have done, in honesty. So from the very beginning, we prided ourselves on setting insanely ambitious goals and finding remarkable ways to achieve them. And so what that meant in the early days is that we'd have these mega big goals, like we're going to 10x our subscribers in this quarter, that kind of stuff. And the risk of that, if you haven't yet figured out the recipe in terms of how to get there, is that you fall short, people get demotivated, it's not ideal. In hindsight, I would have had far more of those goals, those early goals, focused on validating particular activity so that we could then introduce those crazy big goals and have a much greater chance of achieving them.
Yeah, interesting. And was it a case of those stages when you were testing those channels that you had kind of hypotheses of why they would work? Or was it a case of just testing a range of activities to see what had traction? So was there any early indications? And where did you get that data from?
A bit of both. I think you've got to just be super curious. Sometimes we'd have an idea and a hypothesis. We'd then test it, and it would either sink or swim. Other times it sort of came about in another way. But that curiosity is key. To give you an example from what we did in the consumer space. So in the early days of me joining VouchedFor, we were trying to get consumers to come to the VouchedFor website to find a financial advisor. And that's hard because most people don't really give a toss about their finances, right? It's not the sexiest of subjects. You've got to work really hard to stimulate that demand. And so it was over the Christmas period. One of the team had a bit of time. They quickly put together a Google ad offering a free basic financial plan to people. Ad went live between Christmas and New Year. People were thinking about January and getting stuff sorted out. We got a really strong, albeit small, number of people claiming that free basic financial plan. And then come January, we really dialed it up, and it was a massive source of consumer interest for us for many months.
And it did, I suppose that's really interesting in terms of that kind of insight of that element of kind of free and bringing people in. Did the next kind of phases after you'd provided that plan to them, do they have enough intent to want to then actually to kind of sign up and tied to a financial advisor? Because that element of free is interesting. It can play both ways, right? But I suppose it's considered in a level of intent.
Yeah, it's a great shout, and it's a really difficult balance to strike. In the case of that particular offer, it depended on the advisor who was delivering the basic plan. So those advisors who gave genuine value in that plan typically saw a good chunk of those people going on to become full paying clients. Those advisors who took a more superficial approach to it and didn't add much in the way of value at that kind of free stage saw far less people going on to becoming paying customers.
Yeah, interesting. And obviously the VouchedFor is the fact that's kind of double-sided, right? So you've got the advisors, you've got the consumers. What was kind of more difficult at the earlier stages to bring on? Because obviously you're trying to bring them up at the same level at the same time.
Yeah, it's a bit chicken and egg, and you've got different challenges with both, right? I mean, with consumers, it was it is really difficult to get them to engage with financial advice for the reasons given. And there was a tipping point for us. We focused our very early activity on Google Ads. And once we got enough advisors on the site, we then were able to generate an acceptable and scalable CPA through our Google Ads stuff. And we got a decent amount of consumer traffic that in turn helped us attract more advisors. So it's this important symbiotic relationship, which is true for any marketplace business. One of the real breakthroughs for us, particularly on the B2B side, I mean, like any young business, we were always looking for ways to stand out and to punch above our weight. And we were trying to get advisors to not only join our site, but to collect feedback. If they joined our site and didn't collect feedback, they wouldn't get any value from the site. They wouldn't deliver any value to consumers, and they'd churn, and it would be a wasted exercise. But that was hard when we were a new business. We didn't have that much consumer recognition at that point. So we took out an ad, a full page ad in the national press. And within that ad, we called out advisors on our platform who had generated the best client feedback, the best ratings in the previous period. And obviously, through the affiliation with the national press, big known brands, suddenly it just caught the imagination of advisors. And that was a real kind of light bulb flywheel moment for us.
Yeah, and I suppose adding the element of community to the advisors and giving them the kind of platform in that way helps others become involved. So I think that's kind of really interesting in terms of positioning of VouchedFor as a platform, but those advisors being the kind of key point. I think a lot of what you have around VouchedFor and the advisors there is the kind of star rating or reviews, right? Has that been pretty integral to how it's grown, both in terms of the trust on the demand side, but also, the suppliers and the advisors being there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, client feedback is it's the fuel in our engine. It powers all that we do. There is a challenge in the UK with trust in financial advisors, and it's largely unwarranted. We've got more data than any business in the UK now that supports the fact that most financial advisors do a really good job for their clients. There are, as there are in any profession, a handful of bad apples who tend to get a disproportionate amount of press coverage and impact levels of trust in the profession. And so all the good advisors out there, quite rightly, want to shout about the fact that they're doing a brilliant job for their customers. And what better way to do that than with client feedback? And what's really helped us here is I guess using that client feedback to really amplify word of mouth within the advisor community. So that ad that I mentioned in the national press has now grown up to be this big annual top-rated financial advisor guide, which this year was published in the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail on Sunday. It featured over 2,300 top-rated advisors. And if you go back to our LinkedIn around about March when it was published in the Times, you just see post after post after post of advisors shouting about the fact that they've been recognized as top rated on the strength of their client feedback. That reaches all their networks who all obviously like and interact. It's just a good, positive news story and gives us a massive amount of overall reach and engagement within that community, far more than we could ever achieve through spend alone.
I think the ties to associations or partnerships, say like brands like the Telegraph or the Times, also give that level of stamp for approval of trust of VouchedFor and the advisors as well. So I think, and again, that gives trust on the demand side as well when people are coming to the platform. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. I suppose just on that point around the brand of VouchedFor, how has that evolved over time since you've been there, and how much is brand versus support for kind of direct response activity? How's it played a part?
So the brand has it's always kind of stood for the same thing. So we've always had the same mission, which I think has really helped. Our mission is to help everyone access the best financial advice for them to help with life's big decisions, and that really has guided everything that we've done, including the launch of the Hatch business, because we wanted to help everyone, including those who have traditionally been priced out of advice. We launched a product called Elevation to help advisors deliver the best possible advice. So it really has been our North Star, and I think has helped the brand's trajectory over the years. In terms of the split between kind of brand activity versus direct response, we've always done a bit of both, but certainly with a stronger weighting towards direct response, particularly in the early days, because you're conscious at any given time of how much cash you've got, what your runway is, how many months you've got, and you need to make sure that you're bringing in the revenue. That interestingly, we have found that particularly with our B2B stuff, so in terms of reaching financial advisors who become subscribers of our site, the kind of the brand type stuff and the direct response type stuff needn't always be mutually exclusive. So if you take something like webinars, and they're quite interesting because a lot of people think of webinars as kind of a direct response activity. Our experience is that actually a lot of people that sign up for webinars do so with a fairly low degree of intent. They're not necessarily in market. They're quite top of funnel. And so we've stopped, trying to hound every single person that registers for a webinar to get them to engage, because for a lot of them, it's just trying to get them to move too fast, too soon. However, within every webinar audience, you have a lowish percentage, 5-10% or so, who are at a more advanced stage. They've got a greater level of interest in the subject and your services. So what we do is craft an offer for those people, whether it's a personalized consultation on how we can help them grow their reputation and their business, whatever it might be. And that's worked really well for us. And
I suppose a lot of the time on these shows, we talk about acquisition, but you talked about kind of the number of subscribers, the subscriber base. How have you kind of operated the kind of onboarding, but also the kind of the retention process, especially with the advisors on there?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. So, for a business like ours, we've got to be focused on both acquisition and retention. And that's particularly important in our sector because you get a lot of what I describe as unavoidable churn. The average age of financial advisors in the UK is late 50s. So a lot of them are retiring and leaving the industry. So if you're not adding members, you are shrinking as a business. So you've got to be focused on both. We developed this thing we call a staircase when it comes to onboarding advisors, because unlike other businesses, let's say we were just a directory and that there wasn't the client feedback element. We could just sign people up, take their billing details, off they go, and hopefully they'll have a good experience, and the tech can do the rest. However, because the amount of feedback that advisors collect has such a massive bearing on the value they get, we have to invest a lot of time up front making sure that they get that feedback. So we have what we call this staircase process. So before we actually get their billing details, we work with them to build up feedback. So at the point that they actually become a paying customer, they've already got a few client reviews. Their profile therefore looks a lot stronger, and there's a much greater chance of them getting value and ultimately sticking around.
Yeah, it's fascinating you've got that kind of process, and presumably those early touch points help prove if the advisor is likely to churn or not. So I suppose they're kind of key metrics for you, right? That early engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could massively increase the number of advisors that we onboard every single week if we didn't have the requirement that they reach a certain amount of feedback before they're put live on our site. But we know that if they're not inclined to get client feedback, then we might get a month sub or something off them, but ultimately they will churn. And not only that, we risk them becoming a brand terrorist of sorts, because if asked about their experience with us, they might not say positive things. So we want to make sure that everyone that we interact with is set up for success. And they don't start paying us until we've got a decent level of confidence that they're going to get some value.
Yeah, interesting. And is your kind of ICP, you talked about the financial advisors averages over kind of in their 50s and retiring off. Did you tend to target in the early days of VouchedFor more younger, more digital savvy people that were more inclined to use a platform like that, or has it always been a kind of wider spread in kind of age or prominence?
We didn't directly target younger or more digitally savvy advisors, though certainly in the early days, we focused very much on smaller local financial advice businesses. In part because those businesses are typically able to move a bit quicker than, say, larger enterprises. But once we become more established as a business, once our brand was better known, we then started landing large enterprise accounts, and today, so we've got over 10,000 subscribers of our various services, and there's a very broad mix of firms within there, from those kind of smaller local businesses through to the largest financial advice businesses in the UK.
Interesting. Yeah. I suppose these are classic, these are warts and all interviews as much as we can. I can push you on it. Within the kind of growth process that you've been through, have you had any, examples of where things haven't worked out, and how have you learned from them? There must have been instances where hypotheses or tests didn't, work out.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Which one to pick out is the challenge. I don't know of any business who's been through a kind of startup scale up journey that doesn't have multiple failures that they could reference. I think one of the biggest learns for us in the early days, we pivoted the business massively. So around about the time I joined, which was in 2015, the main value yardstick that we held out to advisors was leads. So join VouchedFor, you'll get leads, basically, right, was the pitch. And we invested a huge amount of time and energy in making that work, including a big TV ad campaign and so on. But ultimately, we realized that wasn't the right focus for a few different reasons. So it was at odds with our mission, for one thing, that mission of helping everyone access the best advice. If we were purely focused on leads, we'd move from being a directory where advisors can go on, a bit like TripAdvisor, right? They can find research advisors, and ultimately, if they want to get in touch, they can get in touch through our site, or they can get in touch through the advisor's own site. So that journey empowers consumers, and from all our data generates better outcomes for both them and good advisors. If you focus squarely on leads, we just make our directory type site one big data capture form. We generate 5 or 6 times the number of what we call direct inquiries or leads that we do otherwise. But it just wasn't the right way to go. So we pivoted our value proposition massively. The focus was very much on reputation, helping good advisors drive organic growth. And it was it felt like an enormous change for the business when we did that. But with the benefit of hindsight, it was absolutely the right thing to do. We're in a much better place now than we ever would be had we continued on that path.
And sometimes it's tough, I presume, seeing a metric be lower in that way, but it's quality rather than quantity, right? So, and that can be just as important based on your volumes.
Yeah, absolutely. And the risk is, so if we were to continue focusing on leads, you risk attracting the wrong type of advisors, right? Now, as I've said, most financial advisors in the UK do a really, really good job, but there are some bad apples out there. There's some advisors who take what I call a kind of churn and burn approach to clients. So they get lots and lots of leads in, they charge a big initial fee, and maybe the clients don't stick around. The best advisors out there will bring in clients, do a brilliant job, retain them. They're often quite close to capacity. They don't want to buy in loads of leads, but they're interested in a proposition that helps them demonstrate they do a good job and attract more of the right type of client. So quality over quantity, as you say. And if you've got a proposition that attracts those kind of advisors, then you're doing a far better job for your consumer audience. And that symbiotic relationship can continue to flourish.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, good stuff. I suppose moving on to team then. Obviously, you've gone from that, early stages as you've grown, presumably the team's evolved and grown. What are the kind of best learnings that you've got from that in terms of, team members who you've brought on or teams working together and making sure there's no silos in the business as it scaled?
The most important thing when it comes to getting the right team members is cultural fit. It's probably an obvious point, but there's been times over the years where, let's say, just 1 or 2 people within the business don't quite fit with the culture, and the impact of that is enormous, absolutely enormous. We're 40 people now, and our team, our culture has never been in better shape. Genuinely, we do regular anonymous surveys. We're lucky to have a really brilliant group of people who are both talented and collaborative. They're fantastic. But there's been occasions in the past where 1 or 2 of the team haven't quite been the right fit, and the damage that does is enormous. So first thing is to make absolutely sure that people are going to be additive to the culture. And key to call out here is that particularly when you are in a startup phase, it really isn't right for everyone, right? Startups, entrepreneurialism, right? It's quite in vogue. It's quite trendy. A lot of people gravitate towards it for all the obvious reasons. They've read exciting stories about people selling their businesses for lots of money, and they gravitate towards it. But it's not right for a lot of people. It brings with it a lot of uncertainty. The level of ambition terrifies the hell out of people, right? It's not right for everyone. You need people who genuinely want to be part of that type of environment and are going to be a good fit within it. And then, yes, in terms of team structure, so it's changed a fair bit over the years, but the sort of key components have remained much the same. So we've got a marketing team, we've got a sales team. That sales team was very much focused on kind of advisors to begin with. We've now got a firm sales team and a firm and an advisor sales team. We've also got a success team, and similarly, they're focused on kind of firm level relationships and advisor level relationships. We've got a consumer team who deals with the consumers that interact with us, product tech team, terrified of missing anyone out. But yeah, those are the key functions. And then obviously we've got leadership in place. We've got a data team as well, data science team who analyze things, and an operations team.
And of all those wonderful people and the teams, how much has it been a view of keeping things in-house, or how much you leveraged third parties, agencies, consultants?
Yeah, so we have used some agencies and some consultants over the past few years, but we've done most things in-house. So a bit of both is the answer. There's been times where, so the big benefit of doing things in-house is that, you know, often your breakthrough ideas, you know, like some of the things I've touched on, like the free basic financial plan idea, or the top rated advisor guide, they ultimately stem from really deep insights about your audience. You know, really deep, unique insights that no one else has hit upon. And it's far easier to arrive at those in-house when you're living and breathing the product every single day than it is for someone externally. That said, you know, you invariably, you're always going to reach pinch points where they're either due to bandwidth or skill sets within the team, you're not able to do exactly what you want to do. So those are the points at which we bring in some external support.
Is it somebody we had on these shows before has kind of talked about, you know, either bringing in the agency with their strategic chops, or, you know, slightly different insight the internal team might see or might not see. Or there's sometimes where I see it is where agency can do some level of heavy lifting that the in-house team might not be able to do in terms of, as you say, bandwidth. But yeah, the way that things run together is pretty interesting to get that balance right. Yeah. Look, Alex, we're at time. Thank you so much great content in there. The last question that I always ask people here is, what's the one kind of best piece of advice that you could offer a CEO or a founder who's, you know, at that stage going from a startup to scale up?
I'm going to stick with the people theme. And this is said as someone who absolutely has not always got this right, but do not underinvest or compromise on the hiring process. Good people within a startup scale up environment are just insanely valuable, right? I mean, you know, they're 10, 20x as valuable as someone who's performing at an average level. And also what you'll often find is that someone who's done a pretty good job in a large corporate environment simply doesn't cut it in a startup or scale up environment, where you've just got to be the best that you can be consistently, right? You don't have all the advantages of a large corporate. A key thing I'd offer within this is, whether you're a founder or the leader of a young business, don't be the only entrepreneur in the business. An entrepreneur, you know, it's a broad term, right? It's perhaps overused in some senses, but I'm talking here about people who can find a way when it's not obvious, right? Whether that be in marketing, in finance, in strategy, product tech, and different parts of the business. If you are the only person who can truly find those paths that other people cannot, then you're going to leave a ton of opportunity on the table. I'm not saying your whole team should be those types of people, absolutely not, but you need a small number of them across the business if you're going to really achieve great things.
And I suppose the last kind of question there, in terms of recruiting or finding those people that are truly entrepreneurial, if you had any kind of tips of that in terms of your network or how you find them?
I just leave no stone unturned. So absolutely use your network. Do everything you can to chase up references in a really meaningful way, right? The reference process is fundamentally flawed, right? Most people give you a one sentence ask covering view of someone's performance at their company, and there's legal challenges here, and I get that, but try and get a referee on the phone if you can. Much better than over email. Ask really searching questions. One that I found effective is, if you were to hire this person, what are a couple of the things that you'd coach them on off the bat? Because you tend to get good, valuable insight without them feeling that like they're kind of giving away too much. And the last bit I'd offer is go for lunch with them or a drink with them, whatever it is. Get them out of the interview process and just go and have a chat with them. There's been times where we've hired people, and this isn't quite as true for every role, right? I mean, if you're hiring a developer, it might be somewhat different, right, than if you're hiring a salesperson. But, you know, if you're hiring someone, for instance, whose role is going to be client facing, they might have performed well in the interview process. You go for lunch with them and you'll find out pretty quick whether they've got that spark, that edge that you're going to need them to have to stand out and do their role brilliantly.
Fascinating. Excellent tips. Well, Alex, thanks so much for coming on. And thanks everyone for listening and watching, and I'll see you at the next session.